Listen up, Democrats.
You are fake news.
And lies and facts. Save our democracy from right-wing hypocrisy. We keep our integrity, embrace our diversity. Whenever we're down, we always come back. So listen up, Democrats.
Hi, my name is Larry Taylor. This is People for Democratic Party Reform. You are welcome to type in questions that we will attempt to answer in the chat window. Today, Oz is our moderator and he will relay them to me. You can type them in any time you would like and we will do our best to answer them. The show today is about why people hate Robert's Rules of Order and also why we need them. So what we have is a situation of what's going on within the Democratic Party of Nevada. And so what we're going to talk about is some background to the convention that's coming up, how they are weaponizing the rules, how conventions are supposed to be conducted, and then an issue breakdown. And then we're going to talk about electronic meetings and how they can be authorized. And then finally, what can be done when you face situations like this. And then what you do when you have an unethical parliamentarian in the mix. So in 2016, the most famous of the state party conventions was Nevada. If you remember, there was a disagreement over rules and credentialing. And at one point, the police were called. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a picture of the floor of the convention. And this is at the Paris Hotel. And there were literally hundreds and hundreds of people there. And if you show the next slide, this is how the convention ended. They had to call the police and they lined up. And you know, the images that this invokes are actually pretty scary. What we're going to play for you is just a short clip of a part of the convention, but it gives you a flavor of what the day was like. So Oz, let's cue up the video and show a clip of the presiding officer. So if you couldn't hear what happened, first she said something about 3 people are going to speak for something and 3 people will speak against, and then someone whispered something to her ear, and then she said, all those in favor of the temporary rules, please say aye. And then there was a bunch of shouting, and then she said, all those opposed say no, and there was even more shouting, and then I believe she ruled that they couldn't be debated, and they couldn't be amended. And I believe she said that they were passed so that she could move on with the convention. Not exactly according to parliamentary procedure, to say the least. So now we're in 2020 and the time has come again for the next convention in Nevada. This is in section 2 of the Nevada bylaws, and it's one of the, it's front and center in the bylaws and they have to have it. And there is one piece of business that is specified for the convention, which is the passing of the platform. And then it says any other business that's appropriate for the convention. What has happened is that they've written convention rules that violate parliamentary principles and the curtailment of members' rights. So this is how they have weaponized the rules. Their executive board has passed what they're calling temporary convention rules. And this is what Roberta referred to when she was getting them passed. which is being represented as the rules in force prior to the convention. The convention business is limited to voting in the way they're structuring it. There is no opportunity for members to exercise their right to attend, to make motions and debate, and there's no opportunity for members to consider and adopt the convention rules or challenge the credentials report. Now, why am I bringing this up? Well, also what's happening is that there are rules governing the qualifications of DNC members that are included in the temporary convention standing rules, which is depriving members of their right to run for these positions. And then the other thing that was happening was that the platform was illegally modified, and there is presently no plan to allow the amendment and correction of the platform, just an up or down vote on the floor. So what's up with these temporary rules? I'm going to give a refresher course on rules and conventions, so bear with me for a moment. So just go back to how the hierarchy of laws and rules work. So at the very top are state and federal laws, and they must be obeyed. And then beneath that are charters and bylaws of organizations such as the Nevada Democratic Party. And the bylaws are very specific, and they have to do with the rules of order of the organization that they've adopted, and they cannot be changed except with a 2/3 vote, and they have to have prior notice. So there's a high threshold for changing them, because they shouldn't change very much. Underneath that, you can pass special rules, and special rules are where you want to modify members' rights, but they also have to be passed with a 2/3 vote. And these are typically things like, instead of having 10 minutes to speak twice, you can have 3 minutes to speak for 3 times, or whatever you want. But it plays around with the rights of members to exercise their basic rights in the organization to speak and debate. Underneath that are parliamentary rules, and for the Nevada Party, those are embodied in the Robert's Rules of Order. And so anything that is not written in the charter and the bylaws or in the special rules defaults to the parliamentary rules. And so the parliamentary rules run the whole gamut of democracy, and so you don't really need to repeat a bunch of stuff in the bylaws if it's already in the parliamentary authority. You only really need to have things in the bylaws that differ from the parliamentary authority. And then at the very bottom are standing rules, and those are things that are more procedural and just things that the assembly wants to codify, but they're the kinds of things that can be suspended with just a majority vote. The charter and the bylaws and the special rules and the parliamentary rules, they all must be approved by the state central committee, or possibly at the convention, because the convention itself has been listed as the highest authority in the party. Next slide, please. So there are 3 steps in forming a convention. And since there's nothing in the bylaws that modify these, then it defaults to the parliamentary authority, and this is what they have to do. So the first step is approve the credentials report. The second step is approve the convention rules standing rules. And the third step is to approve the program. So when you approve the credentials report, that determines who the voting body is, because everything subsequent is based on who can vote and if something passes by a majority or whatever is required. The second report is, of course, important because it establishes the rules by which the convention can operate. And then the third step then is approval of the program, which allows the membership of the convention to agree how they're going to spend the subsequent hours in the convention making decisions. These are all up to a majority vote. There's nobody that can impose these on the membership itself. So on the next slide, it says what Robert's Rule says about conventions. Before a convention can transact any other business, it must officially form itself into a single voting body. The official organization of the convention is brought about by the separate consideration and adoption of the 3 reports of the committee: the Credentials Committee, the Committee on Standing Rules, and the Program Committee, in that order. So straight out of Robert's Rules, not modified by the bylaws, this has to be followed. Next slide. and this is on the 3 committee reports. So each of these 3 committee reports is debatable and amendable. Flat out says in the parliamentary procedure. The vote required for their adoption is a majority for the reports of Credentials Committee and the Program Committee, and normally a 2/3 vote for the Committee on Standing Rules. And the reason why it requires a 2/3 vote is because there's usually items in the standing rules that modify your basic rights, put some sort of limit on your basic rights, which you have as a member of an assembly. And so anything that modifies your rights requires a 2/3 vote. If we remember the video where we had a bunch of shouting, it's hard to tell if there was a majority, but when they passed the temporary rules, I think it was pretty clear that it was not a 2/3 majority. And the membership can call for a vote on it if there's any ambiguity, because you just can't have the chair rule something and then move right along like what happened. So with the adoption of these 3 separate reports, the convention is officially organized for conducting business. So until you do this, you cannot transact business. Any questions on the line yet, Oz?
Not yet, Larry.
So what does this mean? So no business can be transacted without the approval of these reports because the convention cannot be formed. Any action taken in an unformed convention can be challenged because it wasn't a legal convention that passed it. And since holding a convention is clearly required in Article 2, Section 2, Nevada must hold a legitimate convention. So they can do whatever they want with this thing that they planned, but it's in no way can be considered a convention. So the thing that they passed and what I referred to in the beginning that is being weaponized are the convention standing rules. So convention standing rules are defined as rules of operating procedure specifically required for the particular convention. It doesn't mean that you can just throw open the doors and throw anything into it. It's really about how the convention will be operating. So what the Committee on Standing Rules drafts and submits for consideration a group of rules known as the standing rules of the convention, which as adopted will apply to that one convention only. So what has happened is that the chair has asked the executive committee to approve the rules, and they can do that, but they are proposed rules. They're not adopted rules. They have no force until they have been accepted by the convention. These rules must in no way conflict with the bylaws of the society, but they can involve modifications of the rules contained in the parliamentary authority prescribed by the bylaws, which is what I was talking about in curtailment of rights. The standing rules of a convention usually contain both parliamentary rules resulting in the relating to the conduct of business and non-parliamentary rules, so that in some ways they resemble a combination of special rules of order and ordinary standing rules, which is why they require a 2/3 vote. So this slide represents the life cycle of the convention rules. So before the convention rules are written. At the start of the convention, it is the second report that is considered and adopted. And once they've been adopted, then the convention rules take effect and they end when the convention is over. But they don't grab into the time space in front of the convention and control things that go on there, which is what they are trying to impose on the Democrats of Nevada. So also just a refresher on what the rights of members are, and this is what we have to protect and defend whenever we go into a democratic assembly like this. If you are a member of the assembly, and anyone who is a credentialed member of the convention is a member of the assembly, in the parliamentary sense, it is a person entitled to full participation in the proceedings, which is the right to attend the meeting, the right to make motions, the right to speak and debate, and the right to vote. So just keep in mind that the right to attend meetings when we talk about how this is being presented as a convention. So what are members' rights? So this talks about how rights can be taken away or not. So no member can be individually deprived of these basic rights of membership or of any basic rights concomitant to them, such as the right to make nominations or the right to run for an office or give previous notice of a motion except through disciplinary proceedings. So you can't specifically deprive an individual their right to participation unless they've done something bad and you've taken it away through a predefined disciplinary process. And so you cannot take away members' rights, basically, was what this says.
Okay, Larry, we got a couple of comment and a question real quick.
Sure.
Okay, Al Wolski. If parliamentary rules are violated, does it follow that all business thereafter is invalid?
It depends on what the violation is. So if something like an election happens and it was procedurally flawed, but no one objected, then it is really hard to reverse the actions of the election. In this case, where you have an entire convention that is not valid because the credentialed members of the convention have not approved the bylaws, then it's not really a convention because they can't transact business, and so any business that is transacted is not valid.
Yeah, Holly Grether wanted to make a comment, a point of fact, actually. Bernie got 36% of the vote in Hawaii. Not bad for a candidate who dropped out and endorsed their opponent. How is this going to affect the trending of following rules, in your opinion? Is that going to put pressure on them to try and act like they're going to go by the rules? What do you think, Larry?
I don't think you can assume they can indirectly infer anything, which is why direct pressure has to be put. When people violate rules of order as blatantly as this, you need to do whatever it takes to get them to adhere to it. And we'll talk about some of the things that you can do a little bit later in the show. So this slide on limitation of members' rights talks about how rights can be curtailed. And so the bylaws, by their nature, necessarily contain whatever limitations are placed on the powers of the assembly of the society with respect to the society as a whole. Similarly, the provisions of the bylaws have direct bearing on the rights of members within the organization, whether present or absent from the assembly. So this is why there's been decisions made on some limitation on your rights, but it's not someone imposing limitations on your rights. It's impositions that have been agreed to by at least a 2/3 vote and written into the bylaws. It is fundamentally undemocratic to have decisions that are made that are not by a majority of the membership. Did I answer all the questions that were pending, Oz?
Yeah, I think you got them. And we're going to welcome more. 1 second here. Vernon Kettleman says, so if they say the transactions are valid and we say they aren't, what happens next?
We'll talk about that. But so one of the things that is on the agenda of the convention is the election of the DNC members. Well, they're not validly elected because they were elected in a convention that wasn't valid. So, they can pretend, but then you have to go to the conventions committees of the DNC and explain to them that these were not validly elected delegates, and so they must be reelected. The adoption of the platform is not legitimate because it's not a legitimate convention, and any other business that was transacted was not legitimate. So it's a stalemate. And if they want party unity and they want the fighting to stop, then this is the kind of things that they have to stop doing. I wanted to go through some highly questionable convention rules. So the process for convention rules is when the second report is brought up for adoption, any member can stand up and move to amend the rules. It is not like what Roberta had said in 2016, not amendable. These are flat out amendable, and ordinarily they're non-controversial because the group who wrote the rules are doing it in the best interest of the membership, and so this, you hardly spend any time in the beginning of the convention. But one of the things that I've been trying to highlight is that all of the action is determined in the first few hours of the convention, because that's where you approve who can vote, what rules you are playing by, and what the program is going to be. And if you decided to skip that because it's boring, you might find that you have just had your rights taken away in your participation in the convention. So you're going to find these very interesting. So there's a line in the convention rules that says the chair of the Nevada State Democratic Party shall be the convention chair. The first vice chair of the Nevada State Democratic Party shall be the convention co-chair, and the secretary of the Nevada State Democratic Party shall be the convention secretary. The secretary is critically important because that's where the actions taken in the convention are recorded, and they become the official record of what was done. And so you want someone who can correctly record what happened during the convention. Sometimes it is perfectly fine for the chair to be the designated the convention chair, but another way to approach this is that the chair is elected at the beginning of the convention. One way to address this is that you have the president or the chair pro tem, which could be the Nevada State Democratic Party chair. And then the chair takes nominations for the permanent chair. And typically when you do this, the chair pro tem becomes the convention chair, if that's agreeable to a majority of the membership. If it's not, then the membership should nominate someone to run against the chair pro tem and then become the convention chair. This is hard to do spontaneously because running a convention is not a simple matter. And so to do this, you should have someone lined up who is knowledgeable about how to run a convention and follow Robert's Rules of Order and all that stuff. Not a low bar to achieve. But anyway, the bottom line is the membership gets to decide who leads the convention. And so if you let a rule like this pass, then you're on your way to limiting your rights. Because if you have a chair who does not want to respect your rights, then it's just going to be a food fight from that point onward. Any questions on that one, Oz?
Not yet. I just wanted to say in Washington State, they are trying to make the state party chair the permanent chair, taking away the temporary status. I think that's just a gross ethical problem I have, just to point that out.
Yes, and we'll talk about how chairs can be replaced. The second rule that I thought was pretty egregious, so it says that 25% of the registered delegates shall constitute a quorum of the convention. But the next part is where it starts making me very uncomfortable. Once a quorum has been certified, the business of the convention shall not be subject to the suggestion of a lack of quorum. That means that everyone in the room could walk out, and you could have one person standing in the convention, and the business can be transacted to the end by that one person. Ordinarily, if someone, according to the parliamentary authority, if someone says, point of order, I believe the convention now lacks a quorum, it compels the chair to determine if a quorum exists, because if you don't have a quorum, you cannot transact business. But this is saying that they don't care how many people leave the room or have been made to leave the room because the police drove them out. The convention can continue with its transaction. So I would recommend striking that last sentence anytime you ever see that. And then the third bad convention rules is about suspension of the rules. And it says, these rules of the 2020 Nevada State Democratic Convention may only be suspended by the instance where an unforeseen circumstance of these rules are prohibited, blah, blah, blah. Under no circumstances shall these rules be suspended for taking any action contrary to expressed intent or will of these rules. And then the third one says the convention chair shall rule any motion to suspend the rules out of order based on the above criterion. I don't know what some of that actually means, but it's because it's kind of ambiguous language, but you don't want to give the convention chair the right to rule any motion to suspend the rules out of order.
That's what Roberta did in 2016. She gavelled her way through the proper procedure, correct?
She gavelled her way through. I haven't seen the transcript of everything that happened, so I don't know about the rest of it. But certainly, if someone tries to suspend the rules, I mean, you shouldn't give away your right to suspend the rules. And we will, when we talk about the remedies available to you, that'll become obvious. Just a word about electronic meetings. So the proposal for Nevada isn't even really to have a meeting, as I understand it. It's mostly just electronic voting. But you cannot have a convention unless you've done some work around your electronic meeting rules. So your parliamentary authority, which if you remember, governs everything that's not modified by the bylaws. It says that a group that holds such alternative meetings does not lose its character as a deliberative assembly so long as the meetings provide, at a minimum, conditions of opportunity for simultaneous oral communication among all participating members equivalent to those of meetings held in one room or area. Now, as you can imagine, if you have 2,000 people on the phone, this could be a nightmare, and that's why you should have rules manage some of that. I was at a meeting that had something like 120 people on it, and some people didn't know how to mute themselves, and they were getting feedback, and so every 5 minutes the meeting would explode into ear-piercing noise because people couldn't control their technology. But you can pass rules that help control some of this stuff, but you don't want the rules to take away your rights to do to exercise your tools in your parliamentary toolbox to make points of order, to debate, and to attend the meeting. So you can't throw out there electronic rules that some members cannot attend because of they don't have technology or whatever reason. You can't deprive a member of their right to attend a meeting just because you have made it electronic. The electronic solution has to fit the requirements of a parliamentary deliberative assembly. If you go to the electronic meeting rules, this is even backed up in their bylaws. The Nevada bylaws say, nothing in these bylaws prohibit the electronic participation in any state central committee meeting subject to the adoption by the central committee meeting of appropriate rules and procedures to ensure fair and maximum participation. So this is saying that they have to adopt these rules. I've not seen the rules, and no one has sent me electronic meeting rules, so I don't know if they exist. But if they don't exist, then you can't have them in the SEC meetings. And then the other thing is, by saying specifically these apply to SEC meetings, it disallows any other meeting, because once you mention something, all other options in that same class of item has to be listed as well. And so for this to allow electronic meetings at the convention, they have to specifically say either any meeting or SEC meeting and conventions. I hope that makes sense. If they would just strike SEC, then it could be argued that they could do electronic meetings at the convention, but according to their bylaws, they're not allowed. Any questions on that one, Oz?
Nope, no questions.
So electronic meetings. So what can you do when you're faced with a situation like this? So undeniably, it is very difficult to operate as you would in a small committee when you're in a room of 2,000 people. However, that's one of the elements of democracy. So they have to provide for you, if you're physically meeting together, microphones so you can get up and do things like make a point of order. And if you want to amend the convention rules, you can stand up and amend it. And it doesn't matter how many people think that you're wasting their time. They can express their disagreement with your amendments by voting you down. So all of these tools work when you have at least a majority on your side. If you don't have a majority, then you're kind of screwed from the get-go. But some of the tools that you have are to make a point of order. And this is when you see something going on that is a violation of the bylaws or of the parliamentary authority. If the chair rules in something that is ambiguous, you can appeal the ruling of the chair, and any two members of the assembly can do that. You don't have to take a vote to appeal the ruling of the chair. Two members can do that. You can amend the credentials report or the convention standing rules. And we talked about some of the things you could amend in the convention rules. Amending the credentials report means that if there are people who are illegally credentialed, by whatever means possible, then you can say, I move to strike, blah, blah, so-and-so from the credentials report, not having, registered by such and such a date, or not having lived in Nevada, or whatever. Clearly, if someone is coming in from California and they've been credentialed, they need to be disallowed because they shouldn't be a voting member. Some votes are very close, and so every vote counts. You can replace the chair at a convention, and so I'll talk a little bit about how that is done in a little bit. Just because the standing rules say that specifies who the chair is, it is really up to the membership to decide who's going to be presiding their meeting. This meeting does not belong to the chair; it belongs to the membership. You can recall officers, and there is a process for recalling them. Suddenly you get all kinds of opposition because you're being disruptive. But if you have officers who are willfully taking away the rights of the membership, it is your right to replace them with someone else who will respect your rights. The real role of a presiding officer is to ensure that the will of the people is carried out, not to impose their will upon it, because that's not a democracy, that's an autocracy. You can, if they plow forward and elect DNC members at a convention that violates all of these things and was not a real convention, then you can do a couple of things. At the subsequent meeting, you can recall the DNC members, and you can also petition the DNC to not seat them because they were not elected in an appropriate manner. And so you can file a challenge with the DNC contesting the results of anything that happens in this non-convention. We have people inside of People for Democratic Party Reform who have successfully filed challenges. So even though that's kind of an arduous process, we know it can be done and we know it can be successful. So one final insight into conventions, and this is one of the best kept secrets of Robert's Rules of Order. And to me, this really conveys the true concept of what a democracy is, and that things are decided by a majority. So this is about the rules. And so the parliamentary authority says rules contained in the bylaws cannot be suspended, no matter how large the vote in favor of doing so or how inconvenient the rule in question might be, unless, and then there's two conditions. The first condition is the particular rule specifically provides for its own suspension. So sometimes you see this language saying, or this could be suspended by a majority vote or something like that, but that's how it provides for its own suspension. Or the rule properly is in the order of a rule of order. And so then the question is, what is a rule of order? And this is kind of a brain twister, but I have a couple of examples of what a rule of order is. And so what this is saying is that, and you often find this, people build rules of order into the bylaws just because they want to illustrate them and not drive everyone to run to a 760-page book every time they need to look something up. And so they do build rules of order into the bylaws, but just because they're in the bylaws doesn't mean that they cannot be suspended. So this is where the parliamentary authority itself says that you can suspend a bylaw if it's in the nature of a rule of order. So the first example is a motion can be made to suspend the rules, so to take away from the chair the authority to preside during all or part of a given session. Now, what we saw in the proposed convention rules is that no one can suspend the rules. So if you agree to give up your right to suspend the rules, then you can't do this. And then this illustration is why this is so relevant here. So it says in a footnote that this is true even if the bylaws contain a provision to the effect that the president shall preside at all meetings, since such a provision is clearly in the nature of a rule of order which may be suspended even if it's in the bylaws. So the rule saying that the president shall preside at all meetings is in the nature of a rule of order and can be suspended if you have a presiding officer that is objectionable to more than half of the assembly or 2/3, depending on the circumstances. They can replace that. You are not stuck with that person. And the other example, which is about the authority to interpret the rules of the Rules Committee. So in the bylaws of the Nevada Democrats, it says that the Rules Committee has the authority to interpret the bylaws. This doesn't mean they're the only ones can ever interpret what something says. So if you find that in a meeting someone comes up and the chair rules that the Rules Committee has interpreted this and this is their interpretation, you move to suspend the rules and go back to the more democratic way, which means that the assembly interprets the rules. And so if you read the whole section in Robert's Rules of Order about appealing the ruling of the chair, this is about where you have something that's ambiguous. And so a good chair, in a case of where something is ambiguous, would move the decision to the assembly instead of trying to force their will on it. It is not an insult to appeal the ruling of the chair. It's actually relieving the chair of a potentially contentious decision and just putting it on the assembly. So those are, so that's the secret weapon if you haven't given that right away. So the final section is regarding parliamentarians, and you often see parliamentarians referred to as if they were some kind of high priest or priestess, and you'll see the chair saying, well, the parliamentarian says, like, their authority is final. So the relationship of a parliamentarian in a organization is that the parliamentarian is there to advise the chair. Sometimes the rules are complicated and the chair is trying to run a complicated meeting with lots of things going on. And so it is very helpful to have someone whose job is to know the rules start to end to advise them. But that doesn't mean that relieves them of the decision of what goes on. Ultimately, it is the responsibility of the chair to make a decision. So if a decision is made, it's not the parliamentarian's decision, it is the chair's decision to do something. If you have a parliamentarian that is giving bad advice, and certainly if the parliamentarian is advising the ways to willfully take away the rights of the membership, it turns out that if they are a member of one of the major organizations that credential parliamentarians, they can be cited for an ethics violation. And so in the bylaws, it says that the parliamentarian must be a member of the National Association of Parliamentarians or an equivalent organization. So it says that they must be certified. So two of the things that they are held to, they must conduct themselves so as to reflect credit on the profession and inspire the confidence, respect, and the trust of the clients and the public. So they have to do that. That is in the code of ethics. And the second thing is they have to advise the client on the proper application of the accepted rules of the parliamentary procedure, notwithstanding the client's personal desires on the matter. So even though the chair might want to do something, that cannot color the ruling of the parliamentarian. The parliamentarian must rule in an impartial interpretation of the laws. If you do not have this, if you find yourself in a situation where you have a parliamentarian who is willfully working against the democratic rights of the membership, they can be turned into the National Association of Parliamentarians for a violation of ethics. The maximum penalty that can be administered is a revocation of their membership. But if you need to do this, the complaints against the National Association of Parliamentarians are filed through a process defined at their website, which is parliamentarians.org. So if you go to parliamentarians.org, you can find the process by which this is done. And what you do is you basically describe the situation and you file the complaint, and then there's a committee within the National Association of Parliamentarians which handles complaints and then looks at the facts and determines if it was a willful violation or if it was just a misunderstanding and their actions were actually valid. So that's what you can do if you have a violation. Is there any other questions, Oz?
No, they've been chatting it up in the chat. I just want to say, as with all of your videos, I'm going to put this one at the top because basically you're giving us some tools that we can actually, in a timely manner, I'll mind you, that we can actually use going into these conventions where we did not have this in 2016 that I could find. So thank you for this. And I encourage everybody in the chat because they get this. You orate everything very clearly, Larry, and we've got a bunch of bright people watching this chat today, and those who get this video shared with are going to be of like mind on this issue too. So thank you for this, and I encourage everybody to share this video presentation out because we need it now more than ever.
So if you found this video useful, we rely on donations for all the infrastructure for producing these shows. So there's a super chat window at the bottom of the chat that if you click on, you got a couple of options for throwing a couple of bucks our way. And so we would greatly appreciate it if you would do that. And that helps us cover the ongoing expenses of Uphill Media, which produces these, and possibly the other expenses that we encounter. So that would be great if you would do that. Every state needs a parliamentarian. And so at the website of this organization, People for a Democratic Party Reform, it's pdpr.org. There's a button on the homepage that you can click and you can join a group to study parliamentary procedure. It would be great if everyone had at least a cursory understanding of their rights inside of meetings, and you had someone who had an in-depth knowledge so that they could do the kind of analysis that I've been doing with Nevada. We need someone in every state to do that. So if you have someone who would like to study parliamentary procedure and democracy, you can either join a virtual study group, and there's two that are available to us, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, or I can also guide you to a local group. So most metropolitan areas have study groups, and it's always great to talk through these things because the concepts are not obvious, and especially if you come from a very toxic environment where your rights have been withheld from you, it's hard to understand how you have been oppressed. And I don't know a better way to express it. So I encourage you to study this at least at a cursory level, and then find someone in your state to study it in depth. There are two books we're at an inflection point where the current edition of Robert's Rules of Order is the 11th edition, and it's going to be replaced in August with the 12th edition. So the 11th edition is only good for a couple of more months. It doesn't change substantially, but the area where I expect it to change most is in the area around electronic meetings, because that is becoming such a hot topic even before the pandemic. And everyone has to understand that their rights need to be protected, and you don't not give them their rights away by moving to an electronic meeting unless you have agreed to it. The other book to read is called Robert's Rules of Order in Brief, which covers 80% of the things that you will ever encounter inside of a meeting. And so if you just want a cursory understanding of parliamentary procedure, then you should read the Robert's Rules of Order in Brief, which you can order off of Amazon, and it's pretty cheap. It's like $6 or $7. And you can probably get used copies of the 11th edition for less than that coming up. It's also going to be reissued, so it's consistent with the 12th edition. And then you can always make friends with a parliamentarian if you need to discuss this stuff. So the organization that is working towards reform of the Democratic Party is called People for Democratic Party Reform. If you would like to join the organization, you can do so at pdpr.org. And we are really searching for people who have voting authority in either a county party organization, a state party organization, the Democratic National Committee, or in the upcoming convention, because it's only by having a voice on the floor at the table that you can affect change. If you leave the party and go do something else, then you're of no value to us because you do not have the right to vote. So the organization has grown 300% in the past month, and we expect to continue growing at about that rate until we have representation in all 50 states. We are currently represented in 21 states. We need to get the other 29 plus the 6 territories and districts. My Twitter feed is ltaylor_PDPR, and if you want to search for us at Facebook, it's Democratic Party Reform. We have swag. So we have merchandise with our branding on it. If you would like to get apparel which says you either are a member of or support the concepts of People for Democratic Party Reform, you can go buy it at pdpr.org. There's a tab for buying merchandise, and it's all made to custom made to order. There's literally dozens of pieces of apparel you can get branded. There's 2 versions, one with white lettering for dark backgrounds and one with black lettering for light backgrounds. So just be aware of that when you order it, but all kinds of cool stuff there. And then if you are watching the recorded version, you cannot do a super chat donation, but you can always go to donate.uphillmedia.org and throw a couple of bucks our way that way as well. And it would be great if you would do so because these things, there's always expenses involved in running this stuff. All shows for People for Democratic Party Reform are listed on the video tab at pdpr.org. So you can go listen to the incredible story of how the Democratic Party of Alabama was challenged at the DNC and was reformed and went from a pretty closed organization to an organization that is now expanding and growing at a very fast rate and is getting contributions like they've never seen before, just because they've accepted the concepts of democracy. And that can happen to every state in the union if we can just wrest control from these people who have this death grip on the process. You can see all the shows at pdpr.org, and they're also listed at live.uphillmedia.org. Oz, if there's no more questions, that is our show for today.
Nope. That's it, Larry. Thank you so much again for this great presentation. I'm going to share the hell out of it to everybody in my network.
Great. Thanks, everyone, for watching.